I'm going to jump into our message for today. We started a series last week on marriage, and it's been our rhythm to every year. Really, the only type of series that we repeat year to year is a marriage series. And it's because we feel so strongly about that and how vital the marriage relationship is, but also how much the marriages are under attack today from so many different angles. And it's difficult in today's society, and it always has been, but I think probably even more so today, to not only just maintain a marriage, but to have a marriage that's thriving, that's growing, that's honoring to God, that also is invigorating to you and is flourishing. And so that's why we're talking about this. And last week we kicked off this series called The Vow. And it's all about renewing love, trust, and commitment. And over these next few weeks, we're exploring what it takes to build, to strengthen a lasting marriage, one that is honoring to God and withstands the challenges of life. And I'll say this again this week, but for those of us who are in the room who may not be in a marriage right now, and you have the tendency to go, okay, this is not for me. And I would say, yes, I believe it is, because stats say that most likely if you're not married today, you probably will be married at some point. And this is a great time to lay the foundation of what a godly and flourishing marriage can look like. And so I hope that you tune in, that you lean into what we're talking about here today. Last week, we started off this series by talking about rekindling love. And we explore this idea that over time, like a fire, a marriage can grow cold when it comes to the aspect of love. But we also said that it doesn't have to end there. And so many times when we use that analogy of a fire, and some of you will remember last week, we said, you never sit around a fire, and when the fire starts to go out, you look at the fire and go, well, it must not have been a real fire. If it had been real, it would have lasted forever and we could sit here and enjoy it. But since it wasn't real and it's gone out, we'll walk away. You never do that with a fire, but so many times people do that with a marriage, using the excuse that the love just ran out or the love was never real. And the reality is, what we talked about last week is when a fire goes out, you rekindle it. And when love diminishes, you can do the same thing. You rekindle it. And we looked at a passage of scripture. If you missed it last week, I encourage you, go back and check it out. But we looked at a passage where Jesus told us when we're rekindling love to start by remembering where we've fallen from, so thinking back of where things used to be, and then repent, which is the idea of turning back towards love. And the third aspect was to return to the actions that you did at first. The actions that you did in the beginning of the relationship that caused that relationship to flourish and the sparks to fly, all of that didn't just happen. It happened as a result of actions. And so that's what we talked about last week. This week, we're going to talk about the idea of rebuilding trust. Rebuilding trust. Lisa TerKeurst wrote about this subject and said this, that trust is the oxygen of all human relationships. It's the oxygen of all human relationships. In other words, without trust, a relationship suffocates. You can have passion, you can have great communication, you can have attraction, you can have shared values, but if trust is broken, the marriage relationship feels fragile. Feels forced. Some of you are in a season today where your marriage relationship is strong and the trust is strong and you feel secure and you feel connected and you feel safe with your spouse. And that's great. And so we're going to talk about how do you strengthen that. But others, if you're honest today, you would say, no, there's trust in our relationship has at least been damaged. And maybe it's not in a catastrophic way, but slowly, over time, trust can leak. And there have been small disappointments maybe and unmet expectations. And you would just say, trust isn't broken, but it has diminished over the years. And then I know there's also another group of people in here today. And for you, there's a trust that has been shattered because of maybe a major betrayal, a breach of honesty, a lack of faithfulness or integrity in your marriage by one or both. And so your marriage today, you feel like the trust is in a shattered 1,000 pieces. And here's what I want to get to the end of where we're going. Regardless of where you are in the level of trust in your marriage, I want you to know today that trust can be rebuilt. It can be rebuilt. And it won't happen overnight, and it's not going to happen just because you say the right words, but it can be rebuilt. So here's where we're going today, just so you know the map of today. We're going to talk about what trust is, how trust gets broken, and how trust can be rebuilt. And one of the exciting things about today's message I'm really looking forward to is we've got the opportunity to hear from a couple here in our Grace City Church family, and they've been kind enough to come on this stage and do a short interview and just share a little bit about a period of time in their life in their marriage, where trust was broken. And so they're going to allow us to kind of peek into that, but they're also going to share what God's done and how God's rebuilt that. And that's my favorite part about being a pastor. And that's my favorite part about being in a church, is that you get to see God do some amazing things. You get to see life change take place. You get to see marriages that people would look at and say, that one's just done. You need to walk away and just, this thing needs to be over. And you get to see God redeem that. And we're going to get a little peek at that today. So that's coming up in just a few minutes. So let's start talking about what trust really is. And I want to define it this way for us. Trust is the bridge that connects two people. It's the bridge that connects two people, making love, honesty, and vulnerability possible. When trust is strong, then love and honesty and vulnerability and security and all the things we want in a marriage, when trust is strong, that bridge is strong, then those things can walk back and forth across that bridge freely. Trust allows both people to move toward each other without fear, but with confidence. But here's the thing, like any bridge, trust isn't something that just appears automatically. It's built over time. And what determines the strength of the bridge is what it is built up, what it's made of, what it's built from. I love Jimmy Evans. It's a guy who's written and spoken a lot over the years about marriage and has some great content. And one of the things he says is he describes the building blocks, the ingredients for building the bridge of trust in a marriage. He says it all comes down to two things: character and connection. Character and connection. When these two things are involved in the building process, the bridge is solid and trust becomes something that you can rely on. Let me break those two things down for us as we move forward. Character is all about faithfulness and honesty and integrity. It's doing what you say you will do. It's being where you say you will be and living in a way that aligns with your spoken values. Does that make sense? Integrity or character is this idea that who you present yourself as is actually who you are. It's character. The second thing he says it's important is connection. And connection has more to do with emotional safety and engagement with your spouse. You see, it's not just about that you are who you say you are and you do what you say you're going to do. That's a huge component. But the other side of that is, do you allow your spouse to truly know you? Do you allow them in? Because people have a difficult time trusting something they can't inspect, something that they can't know, someone that they can't truly be in a deep relationship with. And so when you're in conversation with your spouse, do you allow them in? When they confront you about something that is bothering them, do you take that in or you just repel them and keep them at an arm's distance? Those are the kind of things we're talking about. So trust is built through both character and through connection. And when they're both in place, the bridge of trust remains strong. But our second thing we need to talk about today is how trust can be broken, because it can, right? It's a fragile thing, and we've all experienced that at some point in time in our life. It takes time to build, but it doesn't take very long to break, does it? And when it does break, it creates distance between two people. Here's the thing about trust. Sometimes it can be broken in a moment. It's like a wrecking ball. Everything seems fine in one moment, and all of a sudden, it's not. A financial secret comes to light. One spouse has been spending money that the other spouse didn't know about, or has debt that the other spouse didn't know about, and all of a sudden, it comes to light and trust is broken. Or an affair is revealed. The betrayal of discovering that you've been betrayed in the deepest way completely shatters trust in a moment. Or a hidden struggle comes to light. Maybe your spouse has had some sort of an addiction, whether it's alcohol or drugs or pornography or whatever it is, some kind of hidden addiction, maybe for years, and it leaves you in that moment feeling like, do I even know them at all? And trust is broken in a moment. But other times, trust can be worn down over time. And more often, this is how trust is lost. It's not one big moment, but it's over time with tiny little moments. It's a series of small cracks that eventually make the bridge feel unstable to walk across. Broken promises. I'll change, I promise. I'll change, and you'll see a different me, and then the behavior stays the same, and over time, trust begins to fade. Emotional disengagement. You're physically present, you're there, but emotionally you're distant. You're always on your phone, you're always distracted. You never want to talk about the hard things. You just rather avoid it. There's emotional distance. Little things that we call little white lies or hidden decisions that we make without telling our spouse, and they find out about them later. Or when a spouse doesn't feel heard. They come to you and they have a real concern that they've thought about and they've been hurt by, and they want to present it to you, and so they bring it to you and you dismiss it or you blow up on them. And in that moment, what happens? Trust diminishes a little bit. And at first, these things may not seem like a big deal, but over time they add up. And then one day you realize that the bridge between you is not as strong as it used to be. And so today, that's a big part of the reason I want to share a story from someone in our church. And we're going to talk in a few moments about how do you rebuild trust that has been broken. But I want us to see a little bit today from this couple in our church about how the trust was broken in their life, but also learn a little bit about how it's been restored and what God has done. And so Chris and Alicia, can you guys join me on stage? And can you guys help me welcome them to the stage today? You guys excited about this? Yeah? No, I really appreciate these guys doing this. They have, Chris and Alicia both have been in our church for, almost since the beginning. Right after the start of our church, you guys came. And, one of the things we were just talking about in the back of the church before the service started, we were just kind of going over a few things about, you're going to be on this side of the stage, here's where your mics will be, all that kind of stuff. But one of the things we just stopped and had a cool little moment to remember is, I remember when, things weren't so good, and we were talking, and I remember us saying in the middle of kind of some difficult times, one day God's going to redeem this. Mm-hmm. And God's going to use your story, and it's going to be an encouragement and a help to other people. And it already has been. Like, you guys have already had conversations with friends and coworkers and just been able to be honest and share the struggles, but also share what God's done. And you've helped other people. But I think today's another step in that I think is pretty awesome. And so I just want to say that as we get started in this. And thank you guys for being willing to share a little bit with us, okay? So, all right. So I sent you these questions ahead of time. Let me just look at my questions so I don't go off track and ask you something I didn't say. Why don't we just start off with jumping right in, and you guys can share, start off where you want to, of where trust got broken in the first place. And so we'll start.
All right. Time check. We need a time check on the setup team this morning, first of all. Make sure that's accurate.
You don't believe that? We got the record.
Knowingly and unknowingly, what we know today, obviously, our relationship starts in the late 90s, and then we obviously rekindled in 2016. So coming into the relationship again, I think we can establish that our foundation was individual foundation. It wasn't together. And I think it was probably broken immediately without communicating is the big thing that I would say why trust is broken in our relationship is communication. The delivery of the communication on my behalf, right? The receiving of it, the delivery, it became, disrespectful, unloving, and then obviously all those times in our beginning of our relationship, alcohol was always involved. It was the common denominator. And every single time, you would say an event, I would probably say an explosion that would happen in our relationship. The foundation that we would fall back to is obviously a love for each other, but it was individual. And there was an event probably a year and a half into our relationship where our communication was terrible. We were drinking. I was drinking more, and truthfully, right? And there was an event that happened that really was kind of the turning point for us to try to not only communicate that our trust was broken, but you can kind of piggyback.
We were officially escorted out of Mexico separately. So things got completely out of hand. We were out of control. Alcohol, fueled by not being able to communicate in a healthy way, not providing safe emotional spaces, coming in hot just all the time, not even realizing that our own issues, we were bringing in past trauma, we were bringing in all of this emotional baggage, hurt, and throwing it on the other person. And I knew how to fire him up, and immediately, like he said, explosion. It was so volatile and ugly, and we were in a bad spot. We were in a really bad spot.
Yeah. So it sounds like, that's a couple minutes of covering, there's a lot of stuff. The Mexico thing, maybe we'll find out more details later.
But just for the sake of time.
Yeah. Can you go back? Maybe.
We haven't tried.
Okay.
We haven't left the country since.
We have not left the country since.
But I would say the foundation we all talk about is building foundation. Even during those times, before that happened, we would build our foundation up. I was joking with her. I was like, we'd get a couple stories up, 3-4 stories, and then an event would happen, and we're back down to our foundation that was individual.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the thing that goes into probably one of the next questions about where was the turning point, right? And I'll let you kind of lead there because your notes.
What was the turning point in that?
We'll take it from here. We'll just
The turning point was obviously after Mexico, we were both escorted back separately, separate planes, separate flights, no money, nothing, no communication. And basically decided at that point, obviously the first thing was, and that during that time we were coming to church. I was being, probably not the right word, but I was being dragged to church, right? And I wasn't committed. I was only there because on the face of it, I would say I was doing it to show her that I'm going to do whatever it takes. Mm-hmm. But again, it was individual, right? And then I think what the turning point was, we decided 7 years ago next month that we're going to stop drinking. So that'll be 7 years next year. We rebuilt the foundation. I committed then, obviously, to look into that, obviously, and commit and follow the gospel. But also the communication, right? Our foundation became, when we did start to get into it, and we had a foundation that was built together on Christ. So no matter what happened, even though we're 7 years in, it has crumbled, and we've been able to rebuild again. But on those times, we're not dropping to the basement. We're dropping to maybe floor 3 or floor 4, right? And we've still been able to build on that. And the turning point was committing both of us, me more so, but together, that we're going to chase God individually, but together.
And I just want to say that I know on my end, I would use alcohol as a way to try to connect with him, like a very codependent cycle. And I think once we had the blow up and we realized how unhealthy that would, it's not going to progress. And we cut it out. We sought help. We got a lot of counseling. We talked to experienced, sober people who were in recovery. We wanted to know what their life was like, and they were so gracious to let us in. And, that was a huge turning point, too.
But we also got involved in
Grace City.
We attended every city group, right, with
Right.
Pastor Amos and you guys, and
Yeah.
we got involved in volunteering and, serving other people more so for our kids, and that was a big turning point.
Women's groups. Women's groups played one of the biggest roles in my recovery and in our building. I was able to go and pour out my soul, and they accepted me. I've had women pray over me, pray over our marriage. I carried so much shame, and I could not shake it. The shame just was so, it was weighted. And it took so much work, but to be here and not feel that shame and to be on this stage and sharing those experiences, it's a huge accement. It's big.
And you mean shame from the fact that your marriage wasn't where you wanted
Right.
it to
Shame
be,
from that I brought in from before we got married. Shame 100% around the marriage. The behaviors, the blow-ups, the coming out of it and feeling so guilty, so shameful, and where are we going from here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And
Oh, yeah, huddles. We wake up really early because obviously we have a full house, but
you guys, for those that don't know, you have how many kids?
we have 5 kids.
5 kids, so.
5 kids.
Yeah.
But we wanted to commit to being available to each other, to spending time, communicating, really taking advantage of the time that we could get alone. And a lot of times that looks like 5 a.m., prioritizing physical connection. That was so important
At
for
5
us.
No, sorry.
Actually, yes. That's when it had to happen, and that's what
We
did.
talked about last week, right? Make it happen, so.
And him coming home for lunch, being available, checking in, downloading, even when we didn't necessarily want to, but making it priority. And then in the evenings, we're kicking our kids out of the living room, go upstairs, so that we can have at least an hour.
I mean, you said it in that first message there, the trust, the vulnerable for men. I mean, for myself, my dad's a 24-year Marine. I come from a competitive sports background, and I didn't receive her communication very well. Did I not want to? Did I not know how? I would say is the biggest thing. And the turning point was having these huddles, me being vulnerable and telling her specifically how I want to receive information, right? How it's going to allow me to affect and hit me where I'm not going to blow up. And then her being able to deliver it in that way and vice versa, how she's going to receive the information versus me accusing her. Because sometimes, guys, we can say something that our spouses are going to receive it completely different than how we say it. So us talking about that, getting to that ground point of, hey, this is how we should communicate with each other now. Again, fast forward a year ago, we had an incident, and, before it even happened, right, or after it happened, right, instead of it taking a week or two where we're not talking to each other, or we're like, hey, how you doing in the house? Hey, what's going on? It's 35 seconds, it's a minute, it's 5 minutes, it's an hour, and the foundation is already being rebuilt. And it's because of that communication. And I think for me, for anyone out there, is be vulnerable to your wife because, you love her more than anything. And I think when you get into arguments, for me at least, you can say things, you can do things, but when you actually break down the original why you got married, it's because you love the other person and you're willing to do anything for them. So that's where it took for me I had to open up and be vulnerable and be willing to share my heart with her so she can know who I was. And what you said right there.
I just want to say, creating a safe space for him to do that, I did not initially do that. I think I was very disrespectful in even demanding vulnerability. And I'm like, no, give it to me, and just creating, blow-ups, just really unhelpful ways of delivering information, disrespectful.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And I know there's a lot more that we could talk about. And I do look forward to, the future. I think I love the openness that you guys have, and I want to continue to share some things as you guys are willing that could benefit a lot of us in our church. But I just want to say as we wrap this portion up of the service, just, thanks for your openness today. And then also, I love what God's done in both of you as individuals and in you as a couple. And I think it really just gives him honor and glory. So thank you for coming and being willing to share today. Let's give him a hand. Thank you, guys. So awesome, right? I love that because it's just a peek into, and there's so many other stories of people in our church that we could just go into your marriage, and you've got a similar story, maybe a little bit different, but the same outcome of, man, it was really, really bad at some times, but God has done a lot. And there's been some habits in you that God has changed, and your church community, small group has rallied around you and helped you change, and your marriage is in a new place today. But I want to conclude our time together by talking about how do you rebuild trust? And they touched on a lot of those things right there, but I want to just make sure we highlight those things specifically. And I want to give us 4 steps as we close today, okay? The first one is this. Step 1 is confession and forgiveness. Confession and forgiveness. Rebuilding trust has to start here. And here's the thing. Rebuilding trust is not a one-person game. It's a 2-person thing. And sometimes we get that wrong in a marriage, especially if someone did something that tore down trust in an instance, and we say, okay, you broke it, now you fix it, right? Let me ask you, how does that usually go? It doesn't go well. Because the person who's standing there trying to fix everything feels like they're just being watched, right? And waiting on it to mess up again. So rebuilding trust is a 2-person game. Confession and forgiveness. And without confession and forgiveness, any attempt to move forward is just surface level. It's damage control. It's not true, real healing. It's just moving forward. Because confession, what it does, it establishes truth. And truth is the bedrock of trust. If the truth isn't fully acknowledged, then the bridge will remain broken. James chapter 5 and verse 16 says this, therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. Healing in a relationship only begins with honest, specific confession. What I mean by that is it's not vague apologies. It's not excusing the behavior. A real confession's not, I made a mistake. Okay, I made a mistake, but who doesn't? Like that's not a confession. That's not an apology. A real confession is, I lied about our finances, and I wasn't honest with you, and I see how that hurt you, period. That's a confession. But the second part, and not only confession, the second part of this step is forgiveness. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 32 says, be kind to one another, tender-hearted. What's that next word? Forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. At multiple points in your marriage, there's going to have to be forgiveness from both sides. Forgiveness, and we could spend a whole series on that, but forgiveness does not mean pretending that the hurt didn't happen. It doesn't mean instantly restoring trust. And by the way, we're not saying that forgiveness is a reason to stay in an abusive, a physically abusive relationship. That's not what we're justifying here. I think we all understand there are extreme instances. But forgiveness does not immediately restore trust. Forgiveness and trust are 2 different things. But forgiveness releases the burden of resentment so that rebuilding can begin. Forgiveness helps clear away the rubble of the bridge that collapsed. Does that make sense? And before you can begin to rebuild, you have to clear away the rubble. And the way you do that is with confession and forgiveness. Confession brings in truth to the process, and forgiveness introduces grace. And truth and grace are the bedrock of what you want to build a trusting relationship on. So the first step is confession and forgiveness. Step 2 is transparency. Transparency. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 8 says this, "For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk then as children of light. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true." Just a verse that explains the concept of you and I are not to be walking in darkness anymore. We're to be walking in light. We're to be open, people of integrity. And I want to be honest today and help us understand that trust and secrecy do not coexist. Do they? Trust and secrecy do not coexist. I remember even trying to teach this lesson in a different way to our kids where, sometimes our kids, we would be in the car and one of our kids would whisper to the other kid. And so we've got 3 kids. So when one kid whispers to the other kid, what do you think the other kid, the one that's left out, does? They're really happy about that, aren't they? Instantly, they're mad. "What did you say? I know you said something about me. I know you told it. What did you say?" And then the 2 that were whispering would say, "We promise we didn't say anything about them." And as parents, we would say, "But listen, you don't get, here's the point. As soon as you whisper and you get secretive, they automatically get suspicious, right?" And the same thing happens in a relationship. When there are secrets, there will be suspicion and there will not be trust. But when a couple commits to living with transparency, it brings in security. Matter of fact, the moment you're willing to be transparent with your spouse, you will grow in trust. And some of you probably aren't willing to do that. And you're like, "Well, this is just my right. And I don't have to tell them this, or I don't have to be transparent with them on that. And they're too demanding and this and that." But I'm telling you, you can keep secrets, but you can't build trust at the same time. That's just a reality. For instance, if a couple is working through a financial betrayal, one way to rebuild trust is to make all accounts and passwords visible to each other. That's transparency. No hidden purchases, no secret spending. And that's not a form of punishment. And sometimes we get defensive and we're like, "Well, I'm not a child. I don't have to have someone know every step that I take." It's not about punishment. It's not about someone being controlling over you. But what we're talking about is transparency. And we're in a marriage relationship that is to be built on trust. And there has to be that openness. There has to be that openness for trust to be restored. It means that a husband and wife have no secrets. Open access to everything. Means phones, means social media, means finances. Look, my wife knows that she can pick up my phone at any time and she can look through it. And she does. And she can look through it and she can see what websites I'm looking at. She can look through it and she can see how I've been texting. She can see emails and all those kind of things. And that's not to mean that, every day I'm like checking in, like, here you go. Please review and tell me that everything's acceptable. Thank you. It's not like I'm going to the principal's office. But the reality is I have that same ability with her. Now, here's the thing. When people get to where they're hiding stuff, like, they don't want you to see what's on their phone, then I'm like, okay, well, what's on the phone? Like, let's be real. If there's nothing to hide, there can be transparency. And I believe that is a crucial element. Open access to everything. It also means honest conversations, not hiding struggles, bringing them to light before they become problems. So, second step is transparency. The third step is consistency. Consistency. Luke chapter 16, verse 10. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. One of the great myths about trust is this idea that you just choose to trust people. You've seen that in movies before. Usually it's an action movie and you got like 4 different people that all of a sudden are thrown together. They don't know each other and they're thrown into this terrible situation and they got to figure a way out and they look at each other and say, "We just got to choose to trust." And you're like, that works great in movies, stupid in real life. Okay? That's not, trust has to be built over observing action over a long period of time. Correct? That's how trust is built. It's not built in this moment of we're just going to choose to trust each other. That is not reality. We trust the things that we've tested over and over and over and over and over again. And over time, as we continue to test, it continues to build up to a level of trust. It's not rebuilt overnight. It doesn't happen from one big apology. I'll never do it again. I promise. Great start, but doesn't rebuild it. It's not one big gesture. How about we go on a trip together? Those are great. Again, great start, but doesn't rebuild trust. Trust is rebuilt through small, steady choices day after day. It's not words, it's actions. It's not the intensity, it's the consistency. Does that make sense? That's how trust is built. The bridge of trust is rebuilt one plank at a time. When trust has been broken, the bridge has been damaged, the only way to rebuild is by laying down the planks of character and connection. Those that we introduced in the beginning. Maybe it's as simple as keeping your word. You say you're going to be home by 6, and you're home by 6. If you say you'll take care of something and follow through, it might seem small, but you take care of it. You follow through. But it's not just about character, it's about connection, right? That emotional engagement between two people. And so the question is, are you a safe place for your spouse? And I think that word, a safe place, has been thrown around so much that sometimes we fall. Some people love that word and other people are like, I hate it because it's used so much in our culture. One of the things we learned in one of our mentoring groups was a safe place does not have to be a soft place. Does that make sense? A safe place doesn't have to be a place where you only get like, you're so good, and you only look at the positive. It doesn't have to be a soft place. Those things can coexist. But you have to be a safe place for your spouse. So the question is, when they come to you with something, do they leave feeling like you heard them? Or did you just dismiss them? Did you tell them they're crazy and their problem doesn't make sense and it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things? Do they feel judged when they bring things or shut down? Rebuilding means that you choose to listen instead of getting defensive. And if one spouse is always reacting defensively, then guess what's going to happen? The trust in the other breaks down and they just stop bringing issues. And it's not that the issues stop happening, it's just that you stop receiving them. And so we have to choose for ourselves that I'm going to be a person my spouse can bring something to me and I've got a no punishment or no retaliation policy. Where they can bring something to me that is bothering them about our relationship and I will hear, I will receive it. I may tell them, can I get back to you later when I process this? But I will not blow up on them. That's how we build trust. And so it's step by step, it's little by little. Number 4, final step, are boundaries. Boundaries. And I'm not talking about boundaries between each of you. I know there's a place even for that. But I'm talking about boundaries around the marriage. And here's the thing I think is important. Marriage takes a lot of work to build, right? And when something takes a lot of work to build and it's incredibly valuable to us, then we naturally protect it, right? Think about the things that you put protection around. Most of you, if you live in a home, you have a fence around your yard. And why is that? Because you are protecting what's in your backyard, especially if you have little toddlers. They look at the fence and they think it's to protect them from getting out. It's really to protect other things from getting in and harming them. You put passwords on your computer and on and on and on we could go. We protect things that are important to us. We value those things. Not about control, but it is about guarding what matters most. And so let me just throw out a few very practical things that I think are healthy boundaries in a marriage. I think one, you want to protect your time together. I think that's a boundary that we can put into place. We talked about last week. We've got to have that time together, right? So what do? We set up boundaries, things that we agree upon together. And maybe for you and your spouse, you can talk about whatever season you're in. Maybe a boundary is, we're not going to go through a month without having a date night with just the two of us. Or maybe you're thinking, we're not gonna go through 2 weeks, or whatever it is for you, but you set a boundary and say, okay, this is it, and we're gonna protect our time together. Or Chris and Alicia, I love that. We're getting up at 5 a.m. right now because we got so many kids in this house. We just gotta get up and we gotta get up. And sometimes at night, we're just gonna send them all upstairs to their bed, and if they, if they tear everything off the walls, that's what happens, but we're gonna spend time together. But that's a boundary, right? That's a boundary. So you protect that time together. By the way, another boundary, and these are free, you don't have to pay for these. Another boundary with time is maybe you agree that, hey, I'm not gonna say yes to something unless I talk to you. And you're not gonna say yes to something unless you talk to me. By the way, it'll get you out of a lot of things you did not wanna do. I've been practicing this for years. And it doesn't mean if I tell you this, I know I've told a lot of you this. It's just it's what my practice is. Say, let me talk to Lauren about it and I'll get back with you. And for some of you, listen, I know for some of you that's so hard because you're like, nobody owns me. I'm my own man. I do what I want. I say, first of all, yeah, right. But second of all, it's not about being owned. It's about being respectful because we're in a partnership. We're in a partnership. Our calendar is a partnership. And I know if I say yes to you, I guarantee you I'm forgetting something I've already committed to. And I go back to her, she comes back to me and we go, hey, look, we got invited to this. Can we do that? Oh no, we got that thing. Oh, there we go. Okay, we forgot about that. But that's just a simple boundary. Protect your time. But I wanna kind of end with this. Boundaries that protect physical and emotional intimacy. And again, this needs a whole sermon in and of itself, okay? But I want to give you this scripture, 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 18, because I believe it backs up what I'm about to tell you. Flee from sexual immorality. By the way, I believe that's the only sin in the Bible it tells you to run away from. It's the idea, some temptations you stand and you fight in the strength of the Lord, but this sin over and over again throughout scripture, Paul says, no, run from it. And he says, why? Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but sexual immorality, a person sins against their own body. We got this thing, we like to say every sin's the same. The Bible doesn't say that. God can forgive every sin. That's what the Bible teaches us. But there are different repercussions for different sins. And Paul just says this one is different. It doesn't mean that it's unforgivable. It doesn't mean that God can't mend a marriage that has suffered that type of betrayal. But what it does mean is it just hits different. And so he says, flee from it. And I'm hitting this hard because for some reason our culture, and even in the church, we've gotten loose with this and we think we can put ourselves in situations because, you know what, it'll be fine and I'll never fall and I'll never be tempted. And I just don't think that's wise. I think there need to be some boundaries. Like one, that there's nothing hidden from your spouse. You're not texting the opposite sex and it's hidden from your spouse. If it is, that's a problem. Or you're not in communication with the opposite sex and dropping jokes or innuendos that are inappropriate. That's a big, major red flag. Okay? It means that you're avoiding compromising situations that are going to put you potentially in the place of temptation. And by the way, husbands and wives, if your spouse feels uncomfortable about someone or a situation that you're going to be into, don't diminish that. Listen to that. Because it's such a big deal. He says, flee fornication. One last thing, and then I'll move on. Never, ever, ever discuss issues with your spouse with someone of the opposite sex. I'm going to stand by that. I've seen it happen over and over too many times throughout the 20 years that I've been in ministry. How did it start? How did this? Well, we were having these problems and this happened, and this person at work, they just seemed so nice and they really cared about me. And I began to share and they just understood. And that's the open door that Satan needs into your marriage and into your family that will wreak more destruction than you can imagine. Here's what I'm saying. There's so many things we could continue to go down this list, But what I'm saying is you got to put some boundaries around what you love and what you value. And even though we don't have time to talk through all of those and what they should look like today, I want to encourage you as a husband and a wife to talk through those. Maybe you've never thought about it and you just thought, no, we'll be fine. I want to encourage you. Maybe you do a date night this week. By the way, you better do a date night this week. It's Valentine's. Some of you guys just went, oh, you're welcome. You better figure out a lunch or your 5 a.m. meeting or something. And maybe on that date night, these are some of the things you talk about. Hey, listen, I really value what we have in our marriage, and I value you, and I don't want to be controlling of you, but I do want to protect what we have. So can we talk about even some boundaries, and what would it look like on a work trip? How would it make you feel safe and secure if I was on a work trip to check in with you, to let you know who I'm with and what I'm doing, and what boundaries do you think I should have when I'm away from home and no one knows me, and all those kind of things. Take some time to build out these boundaries. And again, here's what we're saying today. We're not talking about control. We're talking about trust. And we're talking about rebuilding it. And for your marriage, for all of our marriages, to have the kind of love, the vulnerability, the security that we all desire for years and years and years to come, for us to have that, there's got to be a bridge for those things to walk across freely. And today, if that bridge has been broken, or if it's just got a little frayed over time and some planks are missing on the walkway, I just want you to know that it's not done. I want you to know that we serve a Savior that was powerful enough to resurrect himself on the third day. And that same resurrection power that was in that tomb on that day, Paul tells us that the resurrection power also by the Holy Spirit of God lives in you. And if God can raise a dead man back to life, then surely he can resurrect a dead marriage. Amen? And surely he can build back trust that has been broken.